guys, and welcome back to my channel. So today we are going to be doing my top 10 best and worst books of 2020, and I will be doing a separate video for just my romance reads for the year. So we will start with the worst and then end on a high note with the best. So these are in no particular order. I didn't rate them. This is the very worst, this is the very best. A lot of them are popular, and I just want to say that, like, this is not me hating on you for liking this book. These books were just not for me. So first, let's talk about Fangirl. This was a very popular book that was popular enough to rate some spin-off series, and a lot of people read this around the time that it got popular, and it was a very loved book. But reading this in 2020 was, I think, a very different experience than some people had. I had several issues with multiple topics of conversation, fetishization of gay relationships and gay men, some less than appropriate comments about race, and just the overall juvenile writing combined. All of those things just did not work for me. I gave it 1 star, which I use my 1 stars for like books that I just don't feel like anybody should read, or they have like more problematic elements to them that I'm not a fan of and that I think people should know going in. Aside from those elements, which they're large reasons to dislike a book, but the fan fiction was poorly written. It didn't really add anything to the story. I think it definitely could have been taken out and it wouldn't have made a difference. And I think that the characters were very juvenile. They're supposed to be in college, but I felt like they were going into high school, not college. They just had very juvenile personalities, and the writing style in general was just very childish, and I was not a huge fan. And next up on my list is All the Stars and Teeth. This was I believe it was a 2020 release, and it is a YA fantasy following a princess trying to escape from her kingdom and a pirate. This wasn't the worst because of anything in particular, but it just was not memorable at all. Its writing was very just bland and uninteresting, and I don't remember anything. It was just a very boring time, and I just wasn't a fan. I didn't really feel like my time was well spent reading it, and it just was boring. And next up we have The Wicked Deep, which in the same vein as All the Stars and Teeth was very underwhelming. I was expecting a lot more from this. So it's the story of this town who generations ago there were these 3 witch sisters that got hanged because they were believed to be influencing the men in the town to commit adultery and do all of these other things. Every year since then, they come back in the summer and take over 3 girls' bodies and use the bodies and their magic to lure young men into the ocean and kill them. And then once it's over, the town goes back to normal basically, and the sisters go back into the sea, which is where they come from, I guess. I was expecting this to be witchy and atmospheric and a little bit of a mystery, and it was none of those things. I think the big reveal was entirely obvious. The romance was horribly done. All of the characters were really underdeveloped, and there was no like witchy feeling to this. There was no like witchy atmosphere, and this is set in like a island, not an island necessarily, but like this coastal town, and the female main character like lives on an island that you have to take a boat to, and I was just expecting all of these like spooky, kind of like foggy, atmospheric feelings, and I got none of that. I got none of the character development. I got none of the like characterizations. I got none of the witchy feels. It was a huge disappointment, and the cover really upset me because the cover is beautiful and it just didn't cut it. So next is A Curse So Dark and Lonely. It is essentially a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and the main character has cerebral palsy, and she is in the real world, and she attempts to save a girl that looks like she's being kidnapped, and she ends up getting kidnapped in the process. She goes to this world where she could possibly break this curse that is affecting this kingdom, and it was horribly boring. Honestly, I again cannot recall anything about the story. I I couldn't tell you what the world looks like, what the kingdoms look like, anything about the characters, like any distinguishing characteristics about the characters, or anything to do with the plot, really, at all. I cannot, for the life of me, remember it. And I didn't read this that long ago, but it was just so underdeveloped and just so bland that I just didn't have a fun time. And it's something that I honestly don't remember reading, and like I didn't remember reading it until I was going through my Goodreads to make this list, and I was like, oh yeah, I read that this year. So next up is a book that is on this list for a reason, and it's a lot of these are just there because they're not memorable, their writing is bad, the story is badly developed, I don't remember reading it, or I just didn't have a good time. This is, I think, one of the exceptions, because for the first third of this book, I was obsessed, thought it was gonna be 5 stars. And that is A Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. So this is exactly sort of what it sounds like. So this woman and all of the women in her community run a book club, and she suspects that one of her neighbors is a vampire, and so she's trying to convince the women around her and the men that something is going on because one of her employees, her maid or something like that, her child goes missing, and that kind of like leads her into an investigation, but nothing really happens until it starts affecting their own kids. And she is kind of working with the women in her book club to figure out what is going on. But the majority of the book is spent her alone doing investigations into the vampire, but they never actually say vampire in the story, trying to convince their husbands that that's what's going on. Meanwhile, this vampire is integrating himself in every single aspect of their life and becoming really good friends with the husbands, so the husbands kind of don't take the women seriously, and so they kind of go off on their own to figure out what's going on. This is horror in every aspect of the word. It's described in a very horrific way. The themes that it tackles, like injustices and the way women are treated, are horrific, but I don't feel like they really addressed or handled in the correct way. One of the things that Grady Hendrix really tries to tackle is imbalance in relationships between men and women in the 80s, how women were just stay-at-home moms and their opinions weren't taken very seriously, and there was like this mass hysteria or women's hysteria around anything they said, and they were kind of just expected to sit in their houses and knit and take care of their children. And so that's an aspect to it. Another aspect is the idea that the traumas and crimes committed against POCs weren't like exactly taken seriously. They weren't investigated. They were kind of left to fend for themselves, and a huge dichotomy between how the rich and how the poor are handled, like how their crimes and how their trauma are handled. But Grady Hendrix is neither a POC or a woman, so I felt like, one, he can't really make comments about it. Also, he doesn't make comments about it, so nothing is ever tested. The women aspect of it, like the imbalances and the women's hysteria, they aren't handled at all. All of the women are like cookie cutter stereotypical women. They don't have their own distinct personalities, and so it kind of perpetuates the idea that all women are the same and they are supposed to be doing the same things and they all have the same voice, and it just didn't land at all. But my main issue of the book was that the way that the vampire attacks is in a sexual way, and his main victims are kids, which already feels gross. And I mean, as I'm sure was intended, but there is the implication that the individual that is being raped, basically, or assaulted, enjoys it, which is just disgusting and horrible, and I don't like it. Like, one, don't imply that a rape victim enjoys it. Just don't do it. Don't make that parallel. Just don't do it. And also, your victims are kids. So not only are you implying that rape victims enjoy what's happening to them, but now you're including children into that. I didn't like it at all. It's on this list for a reason. And I will say that a lot of the scenes were disturbing. There's a particular cockroach scene that It visibly made me react, and there's a scene with rats. So it's horrifying in some aspects, but if you were to take out those particular scenes, the bare bones of the story is very boring. The vampire himself is very boring, and kind of just like living this day to day with this mom was very boring, and it wasn't good. And it might have been a 3 stars for me if the implications at the end hadn't existed. And I'm gonna put spoilers across the screen for these scenes that I like might be spoilery, but I really feel like it's important for people to understand like what this book entails, because that was so disturbing and disgusting for me that it wasn't even just like, this is a horror book, like this is genuinely disgusting. And I hope that anybody who has read this book hasn't been affected beyond that initial disgust, because the implication of that is just horrible, and I wish that that correlation had never been made, because it makes me so upset. All right, let's move on from that. The next book on this worst list is going to have to be A Court of Wings and Ruin by Sarah J. Maas. I liked the first one okay. The second one is on one of my most surprising reads of the year list, because the second one blew me away. It was fantastic. But the third one was the biggest disappointment probably of any book that I read this year, because the second book was like on this upward trajectory. We were getting so much character development. There was so much more world building. We were leading up to something fantastic, and the third one was just so flat. All of the character development was gone. The world building was non-existent. Plot was just linear and boring, and the ending made me so angry that I'm just like, it still makes me angry. And if you know, you know, but it was such a disappointment for me, and it was definitely on the worst list of the books that I read this year, because it was bad. So next up is also a Sarah J. Maas book, and it's Throne of Glass. So I want to preface this by saying that I don't have an issue with Sarah J. Maas. I will continue to read books that she puts out. There are books that I love. And while I can see issues with her writing style and things like that that are personal issues for me, that has, 1, not stopped me from reading her books, or 2, made me think that she shouldn't be read. Because I understand the appeal, I understand that people like her, and I am all for people reading whatever makes them happy. If Sarah J. Maas is what makes you happy, I 100% support that, as long as she's not problematic. And I 100% support you reading her books, and I'm never going to bash anybody or any of her books for what they are, because I think it's amazing that she got published to begin with. Like, that is an amazing feat, and she continues to come out with these books, and I applaud her for that, and I applaud her readers that love her works. There's too much hate on her and other popular YA authors, and I refuse to contribute to that, because reading is a hobby, and if you like her and her books, I'm so happy for you. Throne of Glass is not it for me. There was a lot of issues that I had with this, but mostly my issue was Selena. Her character itself is very annoying to me. It's a stereotype that I don't like. She is very vapid and vain and self-centered. That kind of wasn't backed by any evidence. So she's like, I'm the best assassin. I can kill anybody. I can take down this whole mob of guards that are in this room with me, and they wouldn't even be able to stop me. But nothing backed that up. Like, no evidence supported that. So it looked like she was just she just had this overinflated ego. I did not like her as a person. I have been told that her character development, or her character, just doesn't get any better, so I probably won't be continuing the series, but it just wasn't for me. All right, so my next worst of the year is definitely going to be Truly Devious. So this is the story of a girl named Stevie who gets accepted into this academy, this private academy. You might hear my tortoise eating his food in the background. If you hear crunching, that's him enjoying his meal. So she goes to this special academy where really smart people get accepted, like the best people in their fields get accepted, and she goes there as a true crime lover. She is obsessed with true crime, and she wants to solve this crime that happened at this school 30 or something years ago, and that's why she goes there. I picked this up originally because it was closely compared to A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, which I'm obsessed with. And it's not at all, and I'm a little mad at people that make that comparison, because A Good Girl's Guide to Murder is fantastic and Truly Devious is not. It is slow, no investigation happens, murder doesn't happen until halfway through. This is like a 400-page book, so no investigation happens, no murder happens, nothing happens, and the ending is truly horrendous. Truly horrendous. Like, makes me angry to think about, so angry that I refuse to continue the series, so angry that I refuse to even look up spoilers to see what happens, because I just genuinely don't want anything to do with the series. So the next one is 3 Dark Crowns, which is a YA fantasy series about 3 sisters who each have their own special powers, and one of them is set to take the throne, but to do that they have to kill the other sisters. This was so bad. The characters were the most indistinct characters I have ever read. You could have replaced the sisters and I would not have noticed anything. You could have taken this sister from this kingdom and put her here with this sister and switched them, and I would have been like, yep, sounds about right. Like, nothing seems different here, because they're all exactly the same. They all have the same personality. The points of view made no sense. The world building made no sense. The magic systems made no sense. It wasn't explained at all. They would introduce plot lines into the story that I'm like, that could make this really good. And then they just didn't use them ever at all. Like, they just forgot these plot lines existed. There was horrible romances in here. There's a love triangle in here that made me viscerally disgusted and angry every single time it came on page. Like, I was so angry the entire time reading this, and I wasted my time. They could have squeezed all like 400 pages of this book into 100 to maybe probably even 50 pages and put it at the beginning of the second one, and it would have made more sense. But instead they gave us 400 pages of absolutely freaking nothing. Not them training, not them coming together and building their bonds, nothing. Just talking about how they were gonna kill each other. That's it. Nothing else happened. And I'm so mad that I wasted my time, and I have no interest in continuing the series at all. So next up, we have a murder mystery that just felt so flat and so bad, and that is In a Dark, Dark Wood. I have a very mixed history with Ruth Ware. I have only really loved one book, and that was The Turn of the Key. And I have One by One on my TBR, but I have read several others, and I didn't like any of them. And this one was definitely the worst. This is a murder mystery that follows a girl who goes to her like ex-best friend's bachelorette party, I think, and a murder happens. I am happy to have like a good old murder mystery. A standard murder mystery works for me. The thing that irritated me about this is the murder happens, and then the character gets amnesia and she doesn't remember anything, so you find out absolutely nothing until the very end. The book is just boring, long, drawn out, pointless clues, and the character sitting in a hospital bed trying to remember, and it's so horrible. The reveal at the end is so horrible when you find out who did it and why they did it. Don't read it. It's so dumb. Those were my worst of 2020. Let's talk about my best. Again, these are in no particular order. Some of these are better than the others, but we're just gonna go down the list that I have written. So first up is going to be Nevermoor by Jessica Townsend. I have read every single book of this series that is out so far, and I read them in 2020. I absolutely love this series. It is a middle grade series about a girl named Morgan Crow, who is a cursed child, which means that on her 12th birthday, she is set to die. However, on her birthday, she gets saved by a Jupiter North who takes her to his magical world, and there she discovers that she also has magical powers, and she's trying to get into this magical society with people that are like her. It is so great. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. The whimsy is fantastic. Jupiter North is the single best character to ever exist in all of literature, and there's like magical animals and like big creatures, like a big cat, and just this sweet found family aspect to this that is just so great, and the magic in it is so whimsical and just fantastic. And I love that Morgan Crow goes from this bleak world that doesn't want anything to do with her and thinks she's cursed to these people that just love her and adore her and would do anything for her, and I love it. So next up is definitely one of the best horror, mystery, thriller books that I read this year, and it is Mexican Gothic. This is the story of a young socialite who gets a letter from her cousin in like the rural part of Mexico, who says that she is ill and there's something weird going on with her new husband's house and his family, and she needs to be saved. So our main character's father sends her out there to see what's going on, and it quickly evolves into a confusing fever dream story where you're not really sure if everything is real. Is it the house that's doing something weird? Is it the family? Is our main character just slowly losing it? And I loved the ending. Like, I wish we'd gotten maybe more of a chapter more just to see like what was going on, but I loved everything about it, and I loved what it ended up being. I loved the suspense and the slow build of like this anxiety because you don't know what's going on, and it just was so well done, so well crafted, so well written. All right, so then the next up that we have is Black Girl Unlimited by Echo Brown. So this is a part memoir, part realism story about Echo Brown, who is a wizard. And she discovers that a lot of the other women in her family and in her town like are wizards as well. And this is so amazingly done. It tackles so many hard topics, like racism, poverty, abuse of many kinds, drug abuse, verbal, physical abuse, mother-daughter relationships with boys, just growing up identity. There's sexual assault in here and the aftermath of that, and it is so fantastically written and is so heart-wrenching. And I've never read anything with this kind of like narrative bent to it. The magical elements of it are so just kind of weird but so well done, and it really makes you question like, okay, are these magical elements there for a reason? Like, are they telling me something? Am I supposed to be inferring into this? It is just so well done and so beautiful, and it just really makes you think about a lot of things, and you really like feel for Echo, and you want to just hold her and protect her, and it's just so heart-wrenching and so good. So kind of in the same vein of a magical realism story, we have A Song Below Water by Bethany C. Morrow. This is a story of a girl who is a siren and her best friend who have a very close, almost sister-like relationship. In this world, there are sirens and different creatures, like magical creatures. Sirens are exclusively Black women, and there is a murder investigation going on into the death of a siren who they assume her boyfriend killed her. But there is a lot of like things going around that because she was a siren, that is he even really guilty? Like, he was just killing her because she's enchanting and she's manipulative, and sirens just use their powers for bad. And one of her the siren in the story, one of her favorite content creators or influencers comes out and says that she is also a siren and that she wants to use her voice to speak up for the community and do some good. So there's a lot of elements into this. There are some protests that are going on. There is comments into police brutality, racism, colorism, a lot of that going on. And in addition to that, there's conversations about identity and familial relationships and sisterhood and friendships and kind of finding your place, because the friend isn't really sure where she comes from, but there's some weird stuff going on with her where she thinks that something magical is going on, but she's not really sure exactly what is going on. This is a very weird book, and I think that is forgotten a lot of the time. And so when people go to pick this up who don't necessarily like weird things, are like, I don't like this. But it is incredibly weird, but it is very well done, very, very well written, and I'm stoked for the second book in the series. The next up on this list is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. The Night Circus is one of my favorite books of all time. When I was able to get my hands on Erin Morgenstern's newest release, I knew I was going to be obsessed. I was not wrong. This is beautifully done. So it follows Zachary, who discovers that there is a doorway when he's a kid in an alleyway that seemingly goes nowhere. And then when he's in college, he discovers a book in his college library that has that exact event, but he didn't tell anybody about that exact event. So it is parts of his life that no one should know about. And he kind of gets entranced and dragged into this world of magic and a magic library and the Starless Sea, and there's a romance in there, and there's just so much going on in this that you don't understand until the very end. Erin Morgenstern is very good at giving you little itty-bitty hints, and then by the end pulling it all together, because the whole time you're confused and you don't know what's going on and you don't know how everything connects, and then once it connects, you're like, she has the biggest brain of all time. Her writing is absolutely stunning, and there are definitely parts of this that I can recognize that aren't great, like her characters are very one-dimensional, but the character development isn't the point of this. The point isn't to see the characters grow, it's to see what the characters experience. There's a huge theme of like fate versus like coincidence versus like just things happening, and oh my gosh, it is so stunning, and I'm just... Alright, so my next favorite of 2020 is definitely going to be The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. I say this in every video, but I talk about this so much on my channel. Like, if you've watched any other videos and you haven't checked this out, I don't know what you're doing, but this is a multiple POV story, and all of the points of view are all following the same girl who has always been told her whole life that beauty looks like white skin, blue eyes, and blonde hair, and that if she doesn't have those attributes that she's not pretty. But each point of view is a friend or a family member or these people that are in her town that are looking at her, and each of them have caused some sort of trauma in her life that makes her who she is by the end of the story. And it is so beautifully written because I think Toni Morrison does such a good job of explaining how humans become villains, how even though they're villains, they're still human, and that they went through their own traumas that caused them to cause the trauma of others. And so she's basically like saying like, yes, what these people did is wrong, and you should not be congratulating them, you should not feel necessarily like what they did was correct, but you have to understand that trauma is a cycle, and abuse is a cycle, and all of these messed up things are a cycle that have to be broken, or they will just carry on to the next person. And that doesn't necessarily make the people that cause these things to be horrible people, but they have just fallen into this cycle that they can't get out of, and that's how they live. And it is so good. It is so good. And you just want to smack all of these people and be like, learn to do better, like treat her right. And then you want to hug her and you want to help her, and it's so good. So my next favorite of the year, a lot of hard-hitting stories this year, because if they pack a punch and they get me thinking, then they're gonna be a favorite. Ooh, I love this. Okay, sorry, I got distracted by under the desk jacket. So next is My Dark Vanessa. I'm sure everyone is aware of what this story is about, but you're following a 15-year-old girl, Vanessa. You're following her in the past and in the present when she's like roughly 30. When she was 15, she was sent away to a boarding school, and she was groomed and abused by her English teacher. And then in the present, she is dealing with the aftermath of finding out that the relationship wasn't necessarily a loving relationship and that it was abuse, because one of his other victims comes forward and speaks out against him and basically comes to her and says like, I want you to speak about your experience and let everyone know what kind of monster he was. She's like, it doesn't make sense. Like, he loved me. This was a loving relationship. It wasn't all of those things that you're saying it was, and he wasn't a monster. But she's slowly coming to terms with what really happened to her. And in the past, there are so many things about this that are just so gut-wrenching, because you're experiencing everything with her. You're experiencing all of these things. You're hearing what he's saying to her. You're you're reading what he's doing to her, you're reading the explicit scenes, you're in her head, and she's so uncomfortable with everything that's going on, and she just wants to get away, and she doesn't know how, but also she doesn't want to get away because she thinks that she's a grown-up, this is what grown-ups do, and he's treating her like she's a grown-up, and she wants to be grown-up, and she needs to act like a grown-up, she needs to just deal with it, and just please him, and it's so gut-wrenching, and you just want to save Vanessa. Like, you just want to take her out of this situation, and she's so uncomfortable with everything that's going on, and she doesn't view him as like this attractive man who like just wooed her. Like, she vividly describes him as being gross, and like she doesn't like the feel of his touch, and she doesn't want anything that's going on to happen to her, but she just wants his attention and his affection, and you're seeing him groom her and change her thoughts. In the present, it's so emotional because she's held this belief that this was love the whole time, and now she's having to fight with the fact that she is a survivor and that she went through all of this, and she's having to like emotionally deal with it, and it is so emotional and so gut-wrenching, and you just get so connected to her, and you want to see her be okay. All right, so next up is going to be the other best horror, mystery, suspense, thriller thing that I read this year, and it was 100% Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. First off, shout outs to Erica, because I would not have read this without her. This was so well done. So you're following an unnamed narrator who has recently been married to a widower, and she moves to his estate called Manderley, which is like a very popular estate where lavish parties were thrown. She's kind of experiencing life in Manderley after his ex-wife Rebecca had died, and it seems like the staff loved her, and it seemed like he's not really over her, and so she's kind of feeling uncomfortable with having to fill this woman's shoes, and there's some weird stuff that starts going on. And kind of like in Mexican Gothic, you don't really know what is causing this weird stuff. You don't know if the narrator herself is slowly losing it. You don't know if the house is haunted or something weird's going on. You don't know if the staff is trying to mess with her. You don't know if it's the ex-wife. Is it the husband? What's going on? And the tension and the buildup is so immaculate that by the end, you're just so stressed and so uncomfortable along with the narrator that you want it over with. You want to know what's going on, and it's so good. All right, and then the last two that I want to talk to you about, and then I will let you get out of here, is Between the World and Me. So this is the letter from the author to his son, basically telling his son the history of racism in America and kind of like how he experienced it, how their ancestors experienced it, and how he's probably going to experience it. And it's so gripping and emotional. There are so many ties to history in there because the author does so much research on his own. He's so well educated on everything that has happened, and he kind of wants to stress to his son that these things are going to happen and you're gonna feel some type of way about them, and that's just the way that life is. It's really emotional, and I think the fact that this was written as a letter to his son just is so much more impactful because it has this feeling of like hope and don't give up, but also you will face these things. Like, as a Black man in America, you are going to face these hardships. You're gonna experience it, and it's gut-wrenching. It's really hard, it's really impactful, and it was beautifully written. All right, and then the last book of this list of the best of 2020, as I'm sure everyone was expecting, is Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare. What can I say about this? So this is following the Infernal Devices kids. It's the newest book in the Shadowhunter Chronicles, and it is so good. It is so good. So basically, you're following their kids, and they're in a weird time period where they've never, like, demons are just non-existent, basically. I mean, they exist, but most Shadowhunters haven't ever dealt with slaying demons and like demon attacks and things like that. And then there's a demon that starts attacking and killing people, and they have no idea what to do. They have no idea how to handle it. It starts getting worse. And so you're following these group of kids as they're trying to figure out how to deal with it, but also you're seeing Will and Tessa as parents, and It's so sweet and nostalgic and just so cute, and I loved it so much, and it's emotional and it makes you angry, and I feel like her writing just gets better and better every book, and I'm just so excited to continue the series. Like, it was so good. So those are the best and worst books that I read in 2020. Make sure you comment down below your thoughts on any of the books that I talked about, or your best and worst of 2020. I would love to know, so I know what to read or what to avoid. But that is gonna be it for this video. Make sure you check out my romance video that should be coming very soon, and I will see you guys in my next one. Thanks so much.